The road stretches out like a black snake under the waning moon. There are no streetlights. No houses. Only the cracked asphalt snaking between pine forests that seem to lean towards the road, like silent witnesses to something they'd rather forget. It is in places like these where the night feels different. Where the air feels heavier. Where every kilometer seems like an eternity, and where, according to those who have been here, the line between the possible and the impossible blurs until it disappears. This is a story of encounters that defy all logic. Of figures that appear on the roadside when no one should be there. Of faces that vanish before you can comprehend what you've seen. Of hitchhikers who never reach their destination, because perhaps they never had one. Chapter 1, The Road That Never Sleeps. National Route 77, which runs through the state of Durango in Mexico, has a reputation that precedes any traveler. Locals call it La Carretera de los Animas, the Road of Souls. It's not an official name. You won't find that title on any map. But ask at any gas station, at any roadside diner, and you'll see how faces change. How voices lower. How gazes shift toward the windows, toward that darkness that awaits beyond. Don't pick anyone up after midnight, they'll tell you. And if you see someone standing at kilometer 45, don't stop. Never stop. The highway was built in the 1950s, on what was once a dirt road used by muleteers and merchants. They say several workers died during construction. Accidents, they called them. A landslide here, a miscalculated explosion there. The bodies were buried in the municipal cemetery of the nearest town, San Pedro de las Colonias, but some claim that not all of them were found. That some remained under the asphalt. That their bones still rest beneath the wheels of thousands of vehicles that pass by every day, unaware of what they are driving on. But the apparitions didn't begin with the dead workers. Or at least, not all of them. The first testimony, Roberto Salazar, 1967. Roberto Salazar was 23 years old when it happened. He was a truck driver, transporting goods between Durango and Torreon. A route he knew by heart, one he had traveled dozens of times under the scorching sun and through the darkest nights. It was October 1967. A moonless night, with low clouds obscuring the stars. It had rained all afternoon, and the asphalt shimmered under the truck's headlights like a dark mirror. Roberto drove slowly and carefully. Visibility was poor, and the road had treacherous curves that had claimed more than one life. It was 2 in the morning when he saw her. A figure by the side of the road. Standing still. Motionless in the rain. At first he thought it was an illusion, a tree, a sign distorted by distance. But as he drew closer, the shape became clear. It was a woman. Young. She was dressed in white, a long dress that the rain had clung to her slender body. Her arm was outstretched, her thumb raised. She was hitchhiking. Roberto slowed down. His first instinct was to keep going. What was a woman doing alone in the middle of nowhere, at that hour, in the rain? But something stopped him. Perhaps it was compassion. Perhaps it was the upbringing his mother had instilled in him, never leave someone in need. Or perhaps it was something else. Something he couldn't explain then, and can't explain now. He stopped the truck a few meters ahead. Through the side mirror, he saw her approaching. She walked slowly, her steps making no noise on the wet asphalt. Roberto rolled down the passenger side window. "Are you okay?" he asked. "Do you need help?" The woman stopped by the door. Her face was hidden in shadow, but Roberto could see that she was trembling. Or at least, that's what he thought he saw. Because something about her posture, the way she held her head slightly tilted, seemed strange to him. "I'm going to San Pedro," she said. Her voice was soft, almost a whisper, barely audible over the patter of rain against the metal of the truck. "Can you give me a ride?" San Pedro was 20 kilometers away. Roberto nodded. "Get in." The woman opened the door and got into the passenger seat. She didn't say anything else. She stared straight ahead, her hands in her lap. Roberto noticed she wasn't carrying anything. No purse, no jacket, no umbrella. Just that soaked white dress dripping onto the truck floor. What were you doing out there? Roberto asked as he started the truck. It's dangerous to be alone on the road at this hour. The woman did not respond immediately. Several seconds passed before she spoke. I was in an accident, she finally said. Her voice was still a whisper. I need to get home. Roberto looked at her. The dashboard light barely illuminated her profile. She had long, black hair, plastered to her face and neck. Her skin was pale. Too pale. As if she had never seen the sun. Is she hurt? Roberto asked. Do you need me to take her to a hospital? No, she replied. Just take me to San Pedro. To the church. I know the way from there. Roberto didn't press the issue. Something in his tone of voice told him he didn't want to talk anymore. He drove in silence, focused on the road that unfolded before him like an endless black ribbon. The inside of the truck was cold. Roberto noticed his breath was fogging up, unusual for an October night in Durango. He turned on the heater, but the air coming from the vents didn't seem to make any difference. The cold persisted. It seeped through every crack, every gap, as if it came from somewhere much deeper than the night outside. Roberto glanced sideways at the woman. She hadn't moved. Her hands were still in her lap, her gaze fixed straight ahead. And then he noticed something that chilled him to the bone more than the cold. He wasn't breathing. Or at least, she couldn't see its chest move. There was no breath escaping its mouth. There was no sign of life beyond that motionless presence beside her. Are you sure it's okay? Roberto asked, and this time his voice was trembling slightly. The woman turned her head toward him. It was a slow, mechanical movement, as if her muscles needed to remember how to work. And when her eyes finally met Roberto's, he had to make a conscious effort not to scream. His eyes were completely black. There was no white. No iris. Just a deep, dark void that seemed to absorb the light from the dashboard. I'm dead, she said in that same whispering voice. I died 3 years ago at kilometer 45. But I need to go home. I need someone to take me home. Roberto instinctively slammed on the brakes. The truck skidded slightly on the wet asphalt before coming to a stop in the middle of the road. His heart pounded in his chest. His hands trembled on the steering wheel. When he looked towards the passenger seat, it was empty. There was no one there. Only a puddle of water trickling slowly to the floor, forming a small pool where she had been sitting. The white dress, the black hair, those impossible eyes, everything had vanished. Roberto stood there, trembling, for several minutes that felt like hours. Then, with shaking hands, he started the truck again and drove without stopping until he reached Torreon, where he swore he would never pick anyone up on that highway again, no matter how desperate they seemed. But the story doesn't end there. Because when Roberto finally dared to investigate, he discovered something that haunted him for months. In October 1964, exactly 3 years before their encounter, a 17-year-old girl named Maria Elena Cortez had died in an accident at kilometer 45 of National Route 77. Her car had skidded in the rain and crashed into a tree. Maria Elena had been thrown from the vehicle and died instantly. She was wearing a white dress. It was her birthday. She was on her way home to San Pedro de las Colonias, where her family was waiting to celebrate. He never arrived. Chapter 2, Patterns in the Darkness. Roberto Salazar's testimony wasn't the only one. It wasn't even the first. But it was the first to be documented, the first to be shared beyond whispers in bars and warnings among truckers. From that moment on, others began to speak out. To share their own experiences. And what emerged was a disturbing pattern that repeated itself time and again along miles of dark highways, not only on Route 77, but on roads all over the world. The ghostly hitchhikers, as they came to be called, always appeared under similar circumstances. Pitch black night. Lonely roads. Adverse weather, rain, fog, snow. Figures at the side of the road, always alone, always asking for a ride to some specific place that, invariably, held some significance: a church, a cemetery, a house where they used to live. And all of them, without exception, disappeared before reaching their destination. The Resurrection Mary Highway, Chicago, United States. In the suburbs of Chicago, there's a road known as Archer Avenue. It's a wide road, well lit for most of its length, but there's a stretch between Resurrection Cemetery and Maple Lagoon where the lighting frequently fails. Where the streetlights flicker for no apparent reason. Where drivers speed up without quite knowing why. That's where Resurrection Mary hitches a ride. The first time anyone mentioned her was in 1939. Jerry Paulus, a young man from Chicago, attended a dance at the Liberty Grove and Hall. There he met a blonde girl with blue eyes who wore a white ball gown. They danced all night. She was beautiful, quiet, with a smile that Jerry described as sad, as if she carried some sorrow she couldn't share. At the end of the night, Jerry offered to drive her home. She accepted. She gave him an address on the south side of Chicago. They got into Jerry's car and drove down Archer Avenue. Everything seemed normal until they got close to Resurrection Cemetery. Suddenly, the girl shouted, "Here! Stop here!" Jerry slammed on the brakes, confused. They were right in front of the cemetery gates. There were no houses nearby, no reason to stop there. "Are you sure?" Jerry asked. "I don't see any houses." The girl didn't answer. She simply opened the car door and got out. Jerry watched her walk toward the cemetery gates, and to his disbelief, she walked right through the iron fence as if it weren't there. She simply passed through the solid metal and disappeared among the gravestones. Jerry returned the next day. He asked about her. He described her face, her white dress, her blue eyes. And that's when someone showed him a photograph. It was her. But the photograph was more than 5 years old. The girl in the picture was named Mary Bregovy, and she had died in 1934 in a car accident while returning home from a dance. She was 17 years old. She was wearing a white dress. She was buried in Resurrection Cemetery. Since then, dozens, perhaps hundreds, of people have reported seeing her. Always on the same stretch of Archer Avenue. Always dressed in white. Always asking for a ride home. And always disappearing in front of the cemetery gates. In 1976, a driver called the police after seeing a blonde girl trying to open the cemetery gates from the inside. When officers arrived, they found the gates intact, except for 2 burnt handprints on the metal. As if someone had gripped the bars with burning hands. The marks are still visible today, though the cemetery has tried to explain them away as the result of rust and the passage of time. But those who have seen them say something else. They say you can distinguish each finger. Every line of the palm. As if someone had pressed desperately, trying to escape from a place from which there is no longer any escape. A 1075, Norfolk, England. Across the Atlantic, on the misty roads of Norfolk, England, there is another story that has endured for decades. The A1075 is a narrow road connecting the villages of Dereham and Watton. It's an ancient track, bordered by farmland and groves that have been there since before the invention of the automobile. By day it's picturesque, almost idyllic. But at night, especially when the fog rolls in from the nearby marshes, it transforms into something entirely different. Roy Fulton discovered it in October 1988. Roy was a truck driver. He had driven the route between Dereham and Watton hundreds of times. He knew every bend, every pothole, every sign. That night, around 11:45, he was driving home after a late delivery. The fog had begun to form, thick and low, covering the road like a white blanket that the headlights could barely penetrate. And then he saw her. A figure stood by the side of the road. A young man, dressed in 1940s clothing. Dark trousers, a brown leather jacket, and military boots. He had his thumb raised. Roy slowed down. The man seemed real. Completely solid. There was nothing spectral or translucent about him. He looked like any other hitchhiker, except for the old-fashioned clothes. "Do you need help?" Roy asked, rolling down the window. The man approached. His face was young, no more than 20 years old. He had cuts on his cheeks and forehead, as if he'd been in a fight or an accident. But the strangest thing about him was his eyes. They were wide open, as if he were in a permanent state of shock. "Home," the man said. His voice sounded broken, as if he hadn't spoken in a long time. "I need to go home." Roy gestured for him to get in. The man sat in the passenger seat without closing the door completely. Roy had to bend down and close it himself. The inside of the truck turned freezing cold instantly, so cold that Roy could see his own breath. "Where does he live?" Roy asked. "Watton," the man replied. "At the airfield." Roy frowned. Watton Airfield had been a military base during World War II, but it had been decommissioned decades ago. Now it was just empty land, used occasionally for training exercises. "The airfield is closed," Roy said. "Do you have family nearby?" The man didn't answer. He stared straight ahead, his hands resting on his knees. Roy noticed his fingers were stained with something dark. Blood, perhaps. Or oil. He drove in silence for several minutes. The fog was getting thicker, reducing visibility to just a few meters. Roy kept his eyes fixed on the road, trying to ignore the icy presence beside him. "There was an accident," the man said suddenly. His voice was still that broken whisper. "My plane crashed. I need to go back. I need to tell you I'm sorry." Roy felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. He glanced at the man, but the instant he took his eyes off the road, he felt a pull, as if something were forcing him to look ahead again. When he looked back at the passenger seat, it was empty. The door was still closed. The windows were rolled up. There was no way the man could have gotten out. But he wasn't there anymore. All that remained was a cold dampness on the seat and a strange smell, like burnt fuel and twisted metal. Roy stopped the truck. He was trembling, not from the cold, but from a visceral fear that gripped his chest. He checked the cab. He checked outside, walking around the vehicle with a flashlight. There was no one there. The next day, unable to get the encounter out of his mind, Roy investigated. He discovered that during World War II, dozens of British aircraft had taken off from Watton Airfield on missions over occupied Europe. Many never returned. But one in particular caught his eye. In November 1944, a Wellington bomber had crashed shortly after takeoff, right on the stretch of road where Roy had picked up the hitchhiker. All 4 crew members had died. One of them was a young pilot in his 20s named James Turner. In the photographs in the military archives, Roy recognized the face. It was him. The man in the leather jacket. The man with the wide-open eyes. The man who was still trying to get back home. The stories accumulate like layers of dust on a forgotten road. Each testimony adds weight to the previous ones, creating an archive of encounters that share too many similarities to be dismissed as mere coincidence or imagination. They are tales that span continents, decades, and cultures. And they all tell the same story. On the loneliest roads, when the night is darkest, there are those who still seek to reach a destination they will never attain. Chapter 3, The Pan American Highway, Testimonies from the South. The Pan American Highway stretches for over 48,000 kilometers, connecting almost the entire American continent from Alaska to Patagonia. It's an asphalt artery that crosses deserts, mountains, jungles, and towns forgotten by time. And in its most remote sections, where GPS signal is lost and cell phones are useless, stories of ghostly hitchhikers abound. The Darien section, Colombia, 1995. Marco Antonio Tellez never wanted to talk about what happened to him in the Darien Gap. For years he remained silent, fearing he would be considered crazy or a liar. But in 2003, in an interview recorded by a local researcher, he finally shared his experience. He was a truck driver transporting goods between Colombia and Panama. The Darien Gap is one of the most dangerous stretches of the entire Pan American Highway, 160 kilometers of dense jungle, treacherous rivers, and dirt roads that disappear with every downpour. It's not a place to travel alone. It's not a place to travel at night. But Marco had no choice. He was 2 days late with his delivery, and his boss had been clear: if he didn't arrive on time, he would lose his job. It was August 1995. The rainy season was at its peak. Marco was driving along a track that barely deserved to be called a road, dodging puddles the size of swimming pools and swerving around fallen branches that blocked the way. It was 3 in the morning. The darkness was absolute, impenetrable, as if the jungle itself absorbed the light from the headlights. And then he saw the hands. 2 pale hands emerged from the undergrowth, flailing desperately. Marco instinctively slammed on the brakes. The truck skidded slightly in the mud before coming to a stop. For a moment, everything was silent except for the steady drumming of the rain on the metal roof. "Is anyone there?" Marco shouted out the window. His voice was lost in the noise of the storm. The hands were still flailing. Marco grabbed his flashlight and climbed out of the truck. The mud reached his ankles. The rain soaked his clothes in seconds. He walked toward where he had seen the hands, illuminating the undergrowth with the beam of light. And he found her. A little girl. She couldn't have been more than 8 or 9 years old. She was standing among the trees, completely still now that Marco had seen her. She wore a dirty white nightgown, torn in several places. Her black hair hung in wet clumps over her face. She was barefoot. "Are you okay?" Marco asked, approaching him. "What are you doing here? Where are your parents?" The girl didn't answer. She simply stared at him with dark eyes that seemed too large for her face. Marco noticed she wasn't trembling. Despite the freezing rain, despite being practically naked in the storm, her body showed no sign of cold. "Come," Marco said, extending his hand. "I'll take you somewhere safe. You can't stay here." The girl finally moved. She walked toward him with slow, deliberate steps. When she took his hand, Marco felt a chill that went right through him. It wasn't the cold of the rain or the night. It was something deeper, more penetrating. Like touching burning ice. He carried her to the truck and helped her into the cab. The girl sat in the passenger seat without saying a word. Marco got in after her, closed the door, and turned the heater on full blast. Hot air filled the cabin, but the cold didn't lessen. If anything, it intensified. "What's your name?" Marco asked as he started the truck. The girl turned her head toward him. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. He tried again. This time, Marco heard a whisper so low he had to lean in to hear it. "Lucia." "And where do you live, Lucia? Where are your parents?" "In the river," she replied in that same whispering voice. "My mom is in the river." Marco felt a knot in his stomach. The Atrata, the river that ran parallel to that part of the road, was known for its deadly currents. Every year it claimed lives: careless fishermen, children playing too close to the bank, travelers trying to cross it when it was swollen. "Did your mom have an accident?" Marco asked. "Do you need us to get help?" "A long time ago," Lucia said. "We were crossing. The river swept us away. Mom and me. She told me to swim. To look for the shore. But I couldn't find it. I searched and searched, but the jungle is very big." Marco felt his skin crawl. Something in the way the girl spoke, in the lifeless tone of her voice, told him this wasn't just a simple survival story. "When was that?" he asked, though part of him didn't want to know the answer. "I don't remember," Lucia said. "I've been looking for her for a long time. Can you help me find her?" Marco didn't know what to say. He drove in silence, his knuckles white from gripping the steering wheel so tightly. The girl didn't speak again. She sat there, staring straight ahead with those eyes that were too big, too dark. 10 minutes passed. 15. Marco scanned the area for any sign of civilization, any house or outpost where he could leave the girl with someone who could properly care for her. But there was nothing. Only jungle and rain and darkness. "Here," Lucia said suddenly. "Stop here." Marco looked around. They were in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by trees and impenetrable undergrowth. There was nothing to indicate that this place was any different from any other stretch of that hellish road. "There's nothing here," Marco said. "Let's wait until we get to the next town." "Here!" Lucia shouted. And this time her voice wasn't a whisper. It was a sharp, desperate scream that pierced Marco's ears and forced him to slam on the brakes. The truck screeched to a halt. Marco turned to the girl, his heart pounding. But Lucia wasn't looking at him anymore. Her gaze was fixed on the left side of the road, toward the river that flowed invisibly between the trees. "There she is," he said, his voice once again a whisper. "There's Mom." Marco followed her gaze. At first, he saw nothing, only the curtain of rain and the darkness of the jungle. But then, among the trees, he made something out. A figure. Tall, thin, standing completely motionless in the storm. It was impossible to see details from that distance, but there was something deeply unsettling about the way that silhouette simply existed there, unmoving, unreacting to the rain that must have been soaking it. "I can't see well," Marco said. "Where?" When he turned back to Lucia, the seat was empty. The girl had disappeared. The door was still closed. The windows were closed. There was no physical way she could have left. But she was no longer there. Marco searched frantically. He checked the seat, the floor, even the cargo compartment behind the cab. Nothing. The girl had simply vanished, as if she had never existed. Except for one thing. On the passenger seat, where Lucia had been sitting, there was a damp patch. But it wasn't rainwater. It was mud. Thick, dark mud, mixed with something else. When Marco shone his flashlight on it, he saw tiny strands of algae tangled in the mud. The kind of algae that grows at the bottom of rivers. Marco didn't stop again that night. He drove non-stop until he crossed the border into Panama, his hands trembling and his eyes fixed on the road, praying he didn't see any more figures on the side of the road. Weeks later, when he finally dared to ask the locals about their experience, an old man in a village near Darien told him something that chilled him to the bone. "A little girl in a white nightgown," the old man said. "Yes, many have seen her. She drowned with her mother in the 60s, when they were trying to cross the Atrato River on a raft. They say the little girl is still looking for her mother. That she doesn't know they both died that night. That she keeps searching for her in the jungle, again and again, without ever being able to find her." The old man paused, looking out the window where the jungle stretched endlessly and darkly. "And they say the mother is looking for her too. That she stands by the river every night, waiting for her daughter to return. But they never meet. They can never meet. Because the dead cannot see each other. They can only see the living." Chapter 4, The Woman on the Curve, Spain, 2001. The N340 is one of Spain's oldest roads. It runs along the Mediterranean coast from Cadiz to Barcelona, passing through white villages, cliffs, and golden beaches. It's a popular tourist route during the day, filled with travelers seeking the southern sun. But at night, in certain sections between Malaga and Almería, the road shows a different side. David Morales was a taxi driver. He worked the night shift, picking up passengers at nightclubs, airports, and hotels. He knew the N340 like the back of his hand. Every dangerous curve, every unlit stretch, every place where the police used to set up checkpoints. It was March 2001. A clear night, without rain or fog. The full moon illuminated the sea to his right, turning the waves into liquid silver. David had just dropped off a passenger in Nerja and was returning to Malaga along the coastal road. It was 3:30 in the morning. The radio was playing soft music. David was singing along, relaxed, enjoying the quiet night. And then he saw her at the curve of death. That's what the locals called it. It was a sharp bend at kilometer 294, right where the road narrowed and was flanked by a cliff. It had been the scene of dozens of accidents over the years. White wooden crosses marked some of the spots where people had lost their lives. The woman stood right at the edge of the curve, on the shoulder, dangerously close to the cliff. She wore a bright red dress that seemed to float around her body on a breeze David couldn't feel. Her hair was long and black, obscuring her face as she kept her head bowed. She wasn't signaling. She wasn't asking for a ride. She was simply there, standing motionless like a statue. David slowed down. His first thought was that she might be in danger, perhaps contemplating jumping. He had heard stories of people coming to that cliff with dark intentions. "Are you okay?" he shouted out the window as he stopped a few feet away from her. The woman didn't react. She didn't lift her head, she didn't move. David parked the taxi and got out, approaching cautiously. "Ma'am, do you need help? Are you lost?" When she was just 2 meters away, the woman finally raised her head. David instinctively stepped back. Her face was beautiful. Disturbingly beautiful. Pale skin, red lips, dark eyes that sparkled in the moonlight. But something was wrong. Something David couldn't immediately identify, but which made him instantly nauseous. "Can you give me a ride?" she asked. Her voice was soft, melodious, but strangely devoid of emotion. "Sure," David said, regaining his composure. "Where is he going?" "Home," she replied. "I live near here." David nodded and guided her toward the taxi. The woman walked with slow, almost floating steps. Her bare feet made no sound on the asphalt. As she passed David, he noticed a strange smell. It wasn't perfume or sweat. It was something metallic, like copper. Like blood. The woman sat in the back seat. David got in the front and looked at her in the rearview mirror. "What's the address?" he asked. "Keep going this way," she said. "I'll let you know when we get there." David started the taxi and continued along the N340. He glanced occasionally in the rearview mirror, watching his passenger. She sat motionless, her hands in her lap, gazing out the window at the dark sea. 5 minutes passed. 10. David was starting to feel uneasy. There were no houses along that stretch of road. Just rocks, cliffs, and the sea crashing against the stones below. "Are you sure she lives around here?" David asked. "I don't see any houses." "Yes," she replied without taking her eyes off the window. "Very close." David looked in the mirror again. And that's when he finally saw what was wrong with her. It wasn't being reflected correctly. I could see her silhouette, the shape of her body, the red dress. But her face in the mirror was different from the one I'd seen in person. In the reflection, her face was mangled. There were deep cuts on her cheeks, her nose twisted at an impossible angle, her lips split. And her eyes were empty, bleeding sockets. David slammed on the brakes. The taxi screeched to a halt. He swerved sharply toward the back seat. The woman was still there. But now her true face was visible. The face the mirror showed. A face destroyed by a terrible impact. A face that should be in a morgue, not in the back seat of her taxi. "Here," she said in that melodious voice that didn't match her mutilated face. "Here it is." He pointed towards the cliff. Towards the edge where the road ended in a 50-meter precipice above the rocks and the sea. "This is my home," he said. "I stayed here." David couldn't speak. He couldn't move. Fear had completely paralyzed him. The woman leaned forward, bringing her shattered face close to David's. He could smell the blood now, fresh, as if it had just been spilled. "Every night," she whispered, "I wait here. I wait for someone to take me. Because I can't leave alone. I can't leave this place. This damned place where it all ended. What does he want from me?" David managed to articulate. The woman smiled. Or tried to smile. With her mouth mangled, the gesture was grotesque. "I just want someone to remember me," he said. "For someone to know I was here. That I existed before this curve took me." And then, without any transition, it disappeared. The back seat was empty. But there was a stain on the gray leather. A dark, damp stain that David didn't want to examine too closely. David started the taxi and drove back to Malaga at full speed, ignoring the limits, ignoring everything except the urgent need to get away from that place. The next day, trembling and sleepless, he went to the local library. He searched through the archives of old newspapers, looking for accidents on death curve. He found dozens. But one caught his eye. May 1987. A car had left the road at kilometer 294, plunging into the ravine. The driver had survived with serious injuries, but his passenger, a 28-year-old woman named Elena Ruiz, had died instantly. The report described her injuries as severe facial trauma incompatible with life. In the photograph accompanying the article, taken at a party weeks before the accident, Elena Ruiz was smiling at the camera. She had long, black hair and was wearing a bright red dress. David never drove that road at night again. And whenever someone asked him why, he would simply say, "Some roads belong to the dead. And the N340, at least that stretch, is one of them." Chapter 5, Theories and Beliefs, What People Say. Testimonies are piling up, but explanations vary depending on who tells the story. Skeptics speak of hallucinations caused by exhaustion, of driver fatigue creating images where none exist. They mention shadows playing tricks on the eyes, the way an exhausted brain can fill information gaps with imaginary human figures. But those explanations don't satisfy those who lived through the events. Because they don't explain the physical marks that remain. The puddles of water on dry seats. The handprints on closed doors. The stains that shouldn't be there. Folklorists offer another perspective. They speak of universal archetypes, of stories that repeat themselves in different cultures because they touch something deep in the human psyche. The figure of the lost traveler, the soul that cannot rest, the spirit bound to a place of trauma. In Mexico, stories of ghostly hitchhikers are intertwined with pre-Hispanic beliefs about Xoloitzcuintles, the dogs that guided souls to Mictlan, the land of the dead. Some say that the spirits that appear on highways are lost souls who couldn't find their guide, trapped between worlds. In Europe, these stories connect with ancient legends of wayside spirits, entities that inhabited trade routes and ancient paths long before modern roads existed. These spirits were said to demand tributes from travelers, a coin, a prayer, an acknowledgement of their presence. In the United States, some paranormal researchers suggest that the apparitions are linked to energy residue, imprints left by traumatic events that somehow repeat themselves over and over again, like a recording trapped in the very structure of reality. But beyond academic or paranormal theories, there are the beliefs of ordinary people. The drivers who travel that route every night. The residents of towns along cursed roads. They have their own rules. Their own ways of protecting themselves. At a gas station on the outskirts of Durango, a worker named Hector shares the rules that all truckers know. Never pick anyone up after midnight. And if you have to, if something in your conscience compels you to stop, do this: before they get in, ask them their full name and why they're there. The living will always answer clearly. The others hesitate. They stammer. Or they give you names that sound old-fashioned. Names that no one uses anymore. And one more thing, Hector continues, lowering his voice even though no one else is around. If you notice it's too cold in the car, if you can see your breath even though the heater is on, stop immediately. Say a prayer. It doesn't matter if you believe or not. Just say it. And ask them to leave. Most do. Most just want to be acknowledged, to know that someone sees them. But some are angry. Those are the dangerous ones. In England, in a pub near the A1075, an elderly woman named Margaret has other advice. Don't look them directly in the eyes. If you pick someone up and something feels off, keep your eyes on the road. Eyes are windows, you know. And if you look into theirs, you might see things you shouldn't see. You might see their death. And once you've seen that, they know you know. And then they won't let you go easily. At a roadside restaurant in Chile, a long-distance driver named Rodrigo offers his wisdom. I always keep a small image of Saint Christopher on the rearview mirror. He's the patron saint of travelers. And I keep salt in the glove compartment. If someone gets in and you feel something's wrong, throw a little salt over their shoulder. Dead people hate salt. It burns them. They're superstitions. Beliefs without scientific basis. But for those who travel those dark roads night after night, they're the difference between getting home or becoming another cautionary tale themselves. Chapter 6, Recent Encounters, The Apparitions Continue. The stories aren't just relics of the past. They aren't tales our grandparents told around the fire. The apparitions continue. Every year, every month, new testimonies emerge from highways around the world. Highway 169, Minnesota, 2018. Jennifer Walsh was driving back from a conference in Mankato. It was December, and a snowstorm had turned Highway 169 into a white ribbon where it was hard to tell where the road ended and the ditch began. It was 11 p.m. Jennifer drove slowly, her hands gripping the steering wheel, focused on the barely visible lines of the road. The heater was on full blast, but the Minnesota winter chill seeped through every crack in the car. And then he saw the figure. A man stood by the side of the road, dressed only in jeans and a thin t-shirt. No coat. No hat. No gloves. Standing in the snowstorm as if it were a spring day. Jennifer slammed on the brakes, her maternal instinct screaming that no one could survive the cold dressed like that. The car stopped beside the man. Jennifer rolled down the window. Get in. It's going to freeze. The man approached. He was young, perhaps 20 years old. His skin had a bluish tint, as if he were actually freezing. But he wasn't trembling. His eyes, when he looked at Jennifer, were glassy, unfocused. "Thank you," she said. Her voice was strangely calm for someone in her situation. She got into the passenger seat and closed the door. The inside of the car instantly turned icy. Jennifer felt the warmth being sucked from the air, replaced by a cold so intense it hurt to breathe. "My God, it's freezing," Jennifer said, turning the heat up even more. What was he doing out there? Did he have an accident? "Yes," the man replied. "An accident. Some time ago. Do you have a phone? Do you need me to call someone?" "There's no one to call." Jennifer glanced at him out of the corner of her eye. There was something deeply unsettling about the way the man stared straight ahead, unblinking, motionless. Like an ice statue. "Where should I take him?" Jennifer asked. "To the Mankato Cemetery," the man replied. "My family is there." Jennifer felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. "The cemetery? At this hour?" "Yes," the man said. "I need to go back to them." Jennifer didn't know what to say. She drove in silence, growing increasingly uncomfortable. The man hadn't taken his eyes off the road even once. He wasn't blinking. He wasn't visibly breathing. "What's his name?" Jennifer asked, trying to break the oppressive silence. "Michael," he replied. "Michael Larson." That name sounded familiar to Jennifer, but she couldn't place it. 10 more minutes passed. Jennifer could see the lights of Mankato in the distance. The cemetery was on the outskirts of town, next to the road. "We're almost there," Jennifer said. "Yes," Michael replied. "Thank you for bringing me." Not many people stop anymore. People are afraid. Afraid of what? Michael finally turned his head to look at her. And Jennifer had to make a superhuman effort not to scream. Her eyes weren't glassy because she was in shock. They were glassy because they were frozen. Literally frozen, covered by a thin layer of frost. And when she spoke, Jennifer could see that her tongue also had that unnatural blue hue. "Of those who didn't leave," Michael said. "Of those who stayed where they died, waiting for someone to take them home." Jennifer instinctively slammed on the brakes. When she looked back at the passenger seat, Michael was gone. But something remained on the leather seat, a thin layer of frost, as if someone made of ice had been sitting there. Jennifer looked up the name when she got home that night. Michael Larson. She found the story in a 2007 local newspaper archive. 19-year-old Michael Larson had died of hypothermia after his car ran off Highway 169 during a snowstorm. His body had been found 3 days later, just 50 meters from where Jennifer had picked him up. He had tried to walk to Mankato. To his home. But the cold had defeated him long before he arrived. Apparently, he was still trying to complete that journey. The encounters multiply. The stories accumulate like fog over an abandoned highway. And with each new testimony, the question persists, whispering, unsettling, what do we truly see when we stop to help a stranger in the dark? And what part of ourselves is left behind when we continue on our way? Chapter 7, Those Who Never Made It Home. There is another category of apparitions. One even more disturbing, if that's possible. They are not just the ghosts of those who died in accidents. They are those who vanished. Who went out one night and never returned. Whose bodies were never found. Whose families still await answers that may never come. And they say that some of them still walk the roads, trapped in an eternal loop, trying to reach a destination that no longer exists. Route 375, Nevada, the Alien Highway, 2012. Nevada's Route 375 has a peculiar reputation. It's called the Alien Highway because of its proximity to Area 51 and the numerous UFO sightings reported over the years. It's a long, straight road that cuts through the Nevada desert like a black scar under an endless sky of stars. But local residents know that it's not just strange lights that appear on that road. Thomas Brightwater, a truck driver who has made the route between Las Vegas and Tonopah for 20 years, tells a story that still haunts him. It was July 2012. A hot, moonless night, the sky so clear you could see the Milky Way stretching like a river of light overhead. Thomas was driving his 18-wheeler, hauling electronic equipment to a military installation. It was a familiar route, almost boring because of how predictable it was. It was 2 a.m. Thomas had been driving for 7 hours straight and was beginning to feel the effects of fatigue. He was considering stopping at the next rest area when he saw the lights. 2 red lights flashing on the shoulder, like the hazard lights of a broken-down vehicle. Thomas slowed down, approaching cautiously. In the middle of the desert, at night, helping someone in trouble was the right thing to do. But it was also necessary to be careful. He'd heard stories of robberies, of people pretending to need help only to then mug Good Samaritans. But when he got close enough, he saw that there was no vehicle. Red lights flickered on the ground, right at the edge of the asphalt. But they weren't connected to anything. They simply floated there, suspended a few centimeters above the ground, blinking at a steady rhythm. Thomas stopped the truck and took out his flashlight. He got out, keeping his hands visible and moving slowly. The desert heat hit him like a wall, even though it was the middle of the night. The air smelled of dried sage and dust. "Is anyone there?" he shouted. His voice was lost in the vastness of the desert. The lights kept blinking. Thomas got closer. As he did, the lights began to move, away from the road and into the open desert. They moved slowly, as if inviting him to follow. Every instinct in Thomas's body screamed at him to get back to the truck. Not to follow those lights into the darkness. But something stronger, something he couldn't explain, was pulling him forward. He followed the lights for about 50 meters. The truck fell behind, its own lights barely visible now. And then the red lights stopped. They hovered over something on the ground. Thomas illuminated the area with his flashlight. It was a backpack. Old, worn from the sun and sand. It was partially buried, as if it had been there for years. Thomas bent down and picked it up. It was surprisingly heavy. She opened it with trembling hands. Inside there was a wallet, an old mobile phone, one of those used in the late 90s, an empty water bottle, and a note written on paper yellowed with age. Thomas took out his wallet first. Inside was an ID. The face in the photo was that of a young man, probably in his early 20s. Blonde hair, light eyes, a confident smile. The name read, David Emerson, born March 15, 1975. The note was written in shaky handwriting, almost illegible in some parts. "If anyone finds this, please tell my family I tried. I tried to get home. I ran out of gas at kilometer 52. I decided to walk to the next gas station. I thought I could make it. But the heat is too much. I can't see the road anymore. It's all sand. It's all light. Please tell my mom I'm sorry. That I love her. That. The note ended there. A dark stain, perhaps blood or sweat, covered the last words. Thomas felt a lump in his throat. He looked around, illuminating the desert with his flashlight. There was nothing else. Just sand and rocks and endless darkness. When he looked again towards where the red lights had been, they were gone. Thomas returned to the truck with the backpack. Once back on the road, his hands still shaking, he called the police. He gave them the exact location, told them about the backpack, and showed them his ID. The investigation revealed something chilling. David Emerson had been reported missing in August 1998. His car was found at kilometer 52 of Route 375, out of gas, with the doors open. But his body was never found. Extensive searches, helicopters, tracking dogs, nothing. David Emerson had simply vanished into the Nevada desert, as if the earth itself had swallowed him whole. For 14 years, his family had waited. His mother had died in 2009, still wondering what had happened to her son. The backpack Thomas found was identified as belonging to David. The handwriting on the note matched his. The DNA on the water bottle was his. But one question remained. A question that no one could answer. Why had the lights appeared that particular night? Why, after 14 years, had something or someone guided Thomas to that exact spot? Thomas has no answers. But sometimes, when he drives along Route 375 on moonless nights, he says he can see red lights flickering in the distance. And he wonders if David Emerson finally found peace, or if his spirit still wanders that unforgiving wilderness, searching for the road home he could never complete. Chapter 8, The Highway of Death, Brazil, 2015. The BR-116, which connects Rio de Janeiro to the Uruguayan border, is known in Brazil as Rodovia de Morte, the Highway of Death. It's not a tourist nickname. It's a description earned through decades of fatal accidents, robberies, and unexplained disappearances. The most dangerous stretch is between Curitiba and São Paulo, particularly the section that crosses the Serra do Cafizal. It's a mountainous area with constant fog, sharp curves, and cliffs that drop hundreds of meters into dark valleys. That's where Marcelo Santos had an encounter that changed him forever. Marcelo was a sales representative. He traveled constantly between cities, spending more time on the road than at home. He knew the BR-116 highway better than the floor plan of his own apartment. He knew where the speed cameras were, where robberies were most frequent, and which stretches to avoid after dark. But that November night in 2015, he had no choice. His meeting in Curitiba had run longer than planned, and now he was driving back to São Paulo 3 hours late. It was 11 p.m. when he entered the mountain range. The fog was thick, reducing visibility to just a few meters. His headlights could barely penetrate the white curtain that seemed to move, to breathe, like something alive. Marcelo drove slowly, with his hazard lights on, silently cursing his bad luck. He wanted to be home. He wanted to be anywhere but on that cursed road, surrounded by fog and darkness. And then he saw the child. Standing in the middle of the road. Motionless. He was wearing blue and white striped pajamas. He wasn't wearing shoes. He couldn't have been more than 6 or 7 years old. Marcelo slammed on the brakes. The tires squealed on the wet asphalt. The car stopped just 3 meters from the boy. Marcelo got out of the vehicle, his heart racing. My God! What are you doing here? Where are your parents? The boy didn't respond. He didn't move. He simply stood there, his arms hanging at his sides, staring at Marcelo with enormous eyes that seemed to absorb what little light was available. Marcelo approached cautiously. Something felt deeply wrong. The way the child remained motionless, unshivering despite the cold and damp. The way he didn't blink. Are you lost? Asked Marcelo, now only a meter away. Come on, get in the car. I'll take you somewhere safe. The boy finally spoke. His voice was strange, as if it came from very far away, distorted by something Marcelo couldn't identify. Are you going to São Paulo? The boy asked. Yes, Marcelo replied. Do you live there? I don't live anywhere anymore, the boy said. And then he smiled. It was a smile Marcelo could never forget. Too wide. Too full of teeth. A smile that didn't belong on a child's face. Marcelo instinctively stepped back. And that's when he noticed other things. The boy's pajamas were soaked, but not from rain or fog. It was thicker. Darker. When the headlights illuminated the boy's small body, Marcelo saw that the liquid was red. Blood. The boy was covered in blood. There was an accident, the boy said, maintaining that horrible smile. A long time ago. We were going to Sao Paulo. My whole family. Mom, Dad, my sister. But we didn't arrive. Marcelo wanted to run. Every fiber of his being screamed at him to get back in the car and leave. But his legs wouldn't respond. He was paralyzed, forced to listen. The truck was coming very fast, the boy continued. It couldn't brake in the fog. It hit us head-on. The car went off the road. We fell off the cliff. We rolled over and over. Mom was screaming. Dad was trying to protect us. But it was no use. The boy took a step towards Marcelo. Then another. His bare feet made no noise on the asphalt. They didn't find me, the boy whispered. The car was at the bottom of the valley. It took them 3 days to find us. And when they did, I wasn't whole anymore. The animals of the forest had visited. Marcelo was finally able to move. He stumbled backward, falling onto the wet asphalt. The boy moved closer, leaning over him. Every night I come back here, the boy said. Hoping someone will take me to Sao Paulo. To finish the journey we never completed. Will you take me? Please. Marcelo didn't answer. He couldn't. Terror had left him speechless. The boy extended a hand toward him. A small hand, stained with blood and dirt with broken nails. Please, the boy repeated. I just want to go home. Marcelo closed his eyes. He didn't want to see anymore. He didn't want to know what would happen if that hand touched him. He began to pray, whispering words he hadn't uttered since childhood, begging any power that could hear him to take him away. When she opened her eyes, the child had disappeared. The road was empty. Only fog and darkness and the distant sound of an owl in the nearby trees. Marcelo got up, his legs trembling, and ran to his car. He started the engine and drove non-stop until he reached Sao Paulo, ignoring the speed limits, ignoring everything except the urgent need to get away from that place. He never drove BR-116 at night again. And when someone asks him why, he simply says, there are things on that road that shouldn't be there. Things waiting in the fog, looking for someone to hear them, to see them, to maybe help them finish a journey interrupted too long ago. Chapter 9, The Patterns Are Revealed. When you compare all these stories, when you place them side by side like pieces of a macabre puzzle, certain patterns begin to emerge. Similarities that transcend geography, culture, and time. First, almost all the apparitions occur between midnight and 4 a.m. The dead hours, as they're called in some places. The moment when the previous day has died but the new one hasn't yet been born. A liminal time, suspended between two realities. Second, the weather. Rain, fog, snow, storms. Conditions that reduce visibility, that distort perception. As if these conditions opened cracks in reality, allowing the impossible to seep into our world. Third, hitchhikers always want to go to specific places. A church. A cemetery. A house that no longer exists. Places that have meaning. Places where, perhaps, something important began or ended. Fourth, there's always something wrong. A detail that doesn't fit. Inappropriate clothing for the weather. Shortness of breath. Impossible body temperature. Something that alerts the conscious mind that this isn't normal, that this isn't human. Fifth, the disappearance. They never leave in a normal way. They never get out of the car and say goodbye. They simply vanish, leaving only traces of their presence, dampness, stains, strange smells, and a cold that lingers long after they're gone. And finally, the most disturbing pattern, many of the apparitions can be traced back to real deaths. Documented accidents. People who disappeared. Lives violently cut short in the very same places where they now appear. It's as if something in those traumatic deaths left a mark. An impression so deep on reality that it persists, repeating itself over and over, trapping those souls in a loop from which they cannot escape. Chapter 10, The Roads Remember. There is a saying among veteran truckers, those who have spent decades on the roads, who have seen sunrise in deserts and sunset in mountains, who know every kilometer of asphalt like the lines of their own hands. Roads remember, they say. They absorb everything that passes over them. Every life that has traveled them, every death that has occurred on them. And from time to time, on the darkest nights, the roads give back what they have absorbed. It's not a scientific explanation. It's not a theory you can test in a lab. But for those who have experienced these encounters, it makes more sense than any rational explanation. Because there's something about roads. Something about those asphalt veins that connect cities and towns, that cut through wild territories where civilization has barely left its mark. Roads are places of transition, of movement, of change. And perhaps, just perhaps, they are also places where the borders between our world and others become thinner, more permeable. One last testimony, Highway 1, California, 2019. Sarah Mitchell never believed in ghosts. She was an engineer, a person of facts and data, of logical explanations and scientific reasoning. When her friends shared paranormal stories, she smiled politely but inwardly dismissed them as superstition or a misinterpretation of natural events. Until the night of October 23, 2019. Sarah was driving along California Highway 1, the coastal road that winds between cliffs with spectacular views of the Pacific Ocean. She had been visiting friends in Carmel and was returning to San Francisco. It was approximately 11:30 p.m. The road was practically deserted. The full moon illuminated the ocean, turning the waves into liquid silver. It was beautiful. Peaceful. Sarah had the music playing softly and was enjoying the moment of solitude after a tiring social weekend. And then he saw her. A young woman stood beside a guardrail, dangerously close to the edge of the cliff. She was wearing modern clothes, jeans, a hoodie, and sneakers. She held her phone in her hand, looking at the screen. Sarah found it strange, but not impossible. Perhaps her car had broken down. Perhaps she was trying to get a signal to call for help. Sarah slowed down and stopped a few meters from the woman. She rolled down her window. "Are you okay? Do you need help?" The woman looked up from her phone. She was young, probably in her early 20s. Her face was wet with tears. When she spoke, her voice trembled. "My boyfriend, we were fighting. I stopped the car. I got out. I needed air. And he left. He left me here." Sarah felt a wave of sympathy. "Get in. I'll take you to the next town. You can call someone from there." The woman seemed relieved. She approached the car and got into the passenger seat. Sarah noticed she was trembling, her hands gripping the phone tightly. "Thank you," the woman said. "Thank you. I didn't know what to do. There's no signal here. And it's so dark." "Don't worry," Sarah said, starting the car. "She'll be fine. Is there anyone you'd like to call? Her parents?" The woman shook her head. "No. I can't. I can't talk to them now. They'd be so disappointed. They'd think I'm stupid for being with someone like him." They drove in silence for a few minutes. Sarah wanted to say something comforting, but she wasn't sure what. She wasn't good with emotional situations. "How long have you been together?" she finally asked. The woman took a while to answer. When she did, her voice sounded distant, as if she were remembering something from afar. 2 years. I met Jake in college. He was fun at first. attentive. But then he changed. He became controlling. Jealous. Tonight we argued because I looked at another guy at the restaurant. I just looked at him. And he got so mad. Sarah frowned. That story sounded familiar. Too familiar. What did she say her boyfriend's name was? She asked. Jake. Jake Morrison. Sarah felt a chill. That name. She knew it. But from where? And when was this fight? Sarah asked, though part of her didn't want to know the answer. Tonight. It's been like, I don't know, an hour? 2? I've lost track of time. Sarah glanced sideways at her passenger. Something was off. The woman hadn't fastened her seatbelt. And now that she thought about it, Sarah hadn't heard the click when the car door closed. Are you feeling okay? Sarah asked. You look pale. I'm fine, the woman replied. Just tired. So tired. Sarah managed to turn on the car's interior light. And when she did, she saw what she hadn't noticed in the darkness. The woman's sweatshirt was stained with blood. It wasn't visible through the dark fabric, but in the light, the stains were unmistakable. And there were scratches on her neck. Red marks that looked fresh. Oh my God, Sarah whispered. She's hurt. We need to get her to a hospital. No, the woman said. Her voice had become strange. Hollow. There's no hospital that can help me anymore. Sarah looked again. And this time she saw more details. The woman's pupils were dilated. Completely black. And they weren't moving, not reacting to the light. And her skin had a grayish tone that shouldn't be possible on someone alive. What? Sarah began, but the woman interrupted her. It happened 5 years ago, the woman said. Tonight. October 23rd. We had a fight in the car. I pulled over here, right here. I got out to calm down. And Jake got out after me. He was so angry. He pushed me. He just pushed me. But we were so close to the edge. Sarah slammed on the brakes. The car stopped abruptly in the middle of the road. I fell off the cliff, the woman continued, as if Sarah hadn't done anything. It took me a long time to reach the bottom. I remember every second of the fall. I remember the impact against the rocks. I remember the cold water. And then I don't remember anything. I only know that I'm still here. Every year. On this date. Waiting for someone to stop. For someone to see me. For someone to hear me tell what happened. Sarah was trembling. She couldn't speak. She couldn't move. Jake said it was an accident, the woman said. That's what he told the police. That I slipped. That he tried to grab me but couldn't. They believed him. He was never charged with anything. And I'm left here, reliving this night over and over again, trying to get someone to know the truth. The woman turned to Sarah. Her dead eyes locked onto Sarah's. Now you know, she whispered. Now someone knows what really happened. My name is Emily Carson. I was 23 years old. And it wasn't an accident. And then, like all the others, she disappeared. Sarah sat in the car for what seemed like hours, trembling, crying, unable to process what she had experienced. Finally, with shaking hands, she pulled out her phone and searched. Emily Carson, Highway 1, California, accident. The news broke immediately. October 23, 2014. Emily Carson, a student at the University of Santa Cruz, had died after falling off a cliff on Highway 1. Her boyfriend, Jake Morrison, reported that it was an accident. He said she had gotten out of the car during an argument, gotten too close to the edge, and slipped. The investigation concluded that it was an accidental death. Case closed. But Sarah knew the truth now. And the question that haunted her for months afterward was, What was she supposed to do with that truth? Call the police and tell them a ghost had confessed to a murder? Who would believe her? In the end, Sarah did the only thing she could do. She wrote everything down. Every detail of her encounter. She posted it online, on forums dedicated to the paranormal, hoping that maybe, just maybe, someone with the power to reopen the case would see it. She doesn't know if it worked. She doesn't know if Emily Carson finally found justice. But he knows one thing for sure: he'll never drive on Highway 1 again on October 23rd. Because some truths are too heavy to bear. And some encounters change the way you see the world forever. Chapter 11, The Silence of the Road. Night falls. Engines roar. Lights pierce the darkness like knives cutting through the black fabric of dawn. And somewhere, on some remote road, someone spots a figure at the side of the road. Will they stop? Will they help? Or will they speed up, choosing to ignore what their eyes tell them is there? Because that's the real question, isn't it? Not whether these apparitions are real. Not whether ghosts exist. But what do we do when we're faced with something that challenges everything we think we know about reality? Skeptics will say they are hallucinations. That a tired mind creates images. That fear and darkness conspire to deceive the senses. Believers will say they are trapped souls. Spirits that cannot rest. Energies that remained anchored to the places where they died. But perhaps the truth is more complex. Perhaps it's not about ghosts in the traditional sense. Perhaps the roads truly absorb something from the lives that pass over them. Perhaps moments of terror, panic, and death leave scars on reality itself. Scars that, under the right conditions, bleed again. Or perhaps there are simply things in this world that are not meant to be explained. Mysteries that exist beyond the reach of science or religion. Phenomena that we must accept without fully understanding them. Epilogue: the next time you drive. The next time you drive at night on a lonely road, when the darkness is complete and the lines of the road are the only thing that anchors you to reality, think about these stories. Think of Maria Elena Cortez, in her white birthday dress, still trying to get home after more than 50 years. Think of Resurrection Mary, dancing eternally in ballrooms that no longer exist, searching for a way back to a cemetery that became her home. Think of the young pilot from Watton, apologizing for an accident that happened almost 80 years ago. Think of Lucia, the girl who is looking for her mother in a jungle that will never let them reunite. Think of David Emerson, walking through a relentless desert, trying to complete a journey that ended decades ago. Think of Emily Carson, repeating her last night over and over again, hoping someone will hear her truth. And when you see a figure at the side of the road, when your headlights illuminate a solitary silhouette that shouldn't be there, you decide. Do you stop? Do you open the door to the unknown? Do you become part of a story that maybe someone will tell someday, whispering in the dark about the driver who saw something he can't explain? Or you simply keep going, speeding up a little, looking away, pretending you saw nothing? That it was just a shadow. An illusion. A trick of the light and fatigue. Because in the end, that is the choice we all face when we encounter the impossible: to recognize it and be changed by it, or to deny it and continue living as if nothing had happened. But remember this: if you ever stop, if you ever open that door and allow a stranger into your vehicle in the dead of night, make sure you ask the right questions. Ask their name. Ask why they're there. And above all, pay attention to the signs. To the inexplicable cold. To the lack of breath. To the details that don't add up. Because the roads are full of travelers. And not all of them are alive. The stories continue. Every night, somewhere in the world, someone has an encounter they can't explain. And every morning, when the sun rises and the light dispels the shadows, they wonder if it really happened. If they truly saw what they think they saw. But when night falls again, when the roads are once more plunged into darkness, the figures return. Standing on the roadside. Walking along cliff edges. Waving with hands that may no longer be flesh and blood. Expecting. Always waiting. Because the dead have patience. All of eternity to find someone who will listen to them. Who will see them. Who might, just maybe, help them finish a journey that should never have been interrupted. And the roads remind us. They remember every life, every death, every soul that passed through them and never reached its destination. And from time to time, on the darkest nights, the roads give back what they have kept hidden. This has been Ghostly Hitchhikers. If you have your own dark road adventures, leave them in the comments. And remember, the next time you're driving at night and see someone hitchhiking, maybe it's best to just keep driving. See you in the next mystery. If we ever get there.